वेलकम बैक टू अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ थॉट बिहाइंड थिंग्स. आज हमारे साथ दो बहुत ही खास मेहमान मौजूद हैं जो कि they're not from Pakistan, so we're going to be having this conversation in English. They're all the way from Afghanistan and they're here for a conference, and I'm honored that they took the time out to be part of this podcast. Shahrzad Koofi, who is the coordinator for Pakistan-Afghanistan Youth Forum. She's also previously worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Afghanistan, and she's also the director for Justice for Equality, which is a non-profit that's working on empowering youth and other things that we're going to talk about. We also have Asad Kosha, who is the chief editor of Kabul Now, which is basically the English language newspaper for Ittila.
Atirus.
Right. Sir, guys, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you for having us.
I'd like to start the conversation with you, Shahrzad, just to sort of understand your work with Pakistan-Afghanistan Youth Forum as a coordinator as well as Justice for Equality. Run me through a little bit about what you do.
So when I was like 16 years old, I started working with this nonprofit organization. It was originally called Triple SPO. So it worked for women, children, it worked for like the environment as whole. But now once I turned 18, I became the director and we changed the name to Justice for Equality, and we narrowed down the focus to women more.
Right.
So we are working on peace building for women, economic opportunities for women and all that stuff. I've worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an intern, and now I've just recently joined the Pakistan-Afghanistan Youth Forum, and I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. That sounds great. Sir, Asad Kosha, can you tell me a little bit about your experience being a journalist in a country that has unfortunately been ravaged by war in the past 2 decades?
Thank you. I have a mixed background of journalism and research. I have worked as a field work researcher as well, and currently I am the chief editor of Kabul Now. It is a tough work doing journalism in Afghanistan, given the challenges, given the security threats. But we have been doing, and I enjoy it.
Right. Obviously, the security challenges are there, and we're going to talk. I want to sort of explore the sort of political situation that's been evolving recently. But I feel like that's a bit too serious right now for the conversation. So I'm going to come back to you, Shahrzad. Run me through a little bit about how the society in Afghanistan is, because a lot of us in Pakistan, when we're looking at Afghanistan, we're only seeing Western media. Obviously, it was very much tailored around the war. It was showing very specific areas within Afghanistan. To be very honest, we don't know what Kabul looks like in terms of how you probably have seen how Islamabad looks like.
Right.
And unfortunately, when it comes to media, and particularly international media, we do see a sort of like a very sort of siloed, way of how they represent certain countries. So how is Afghanistan in your experience? You're from Kabul as well?
No, I'm from Badakhshan, but I've lived in Kabul almost all my life.
Right. So what are the cities like? What is the city life like?
So I was born in Faizabad city of Badakhshan until I was like 3 years old. Then we moved to Kabul because my mom was actually one of the very few women who worked even during the Taliban. And then once the Taliban era was over, she moved to Kabul and she started working with the UN. From there on, I was first in the creche in UN, so I had a lot of exposure to many different people. And then I joined the high school in Afghanistan, which was from Turks. So I learned Turkish there, and then I managed to get a scholarship to go to US. So I've had a lot of experiences with different kind of people. I've seen a lot of different parts of the world, and I could easily compare Afghanistan to other countries, and I could say that the women of Afghanistan are not as privileged as other women around the globe, although women's issues are there globally. Every country has its issues. Nowhere is 100% safe for women, but Afghanistan in particular have a lot of problems. When as a woman it's not easy to live in Afghanistan, but I'm 23 years old and I've lived almost all my life in Afghanistan. So, of course, after the Taliban era, it was a bit better. There were more opportunities for women in terms of work, in terms of getting involved into politics. My mom was actually the first deputy Afghan speaker in the parliament of Afghanistan's history, the first woman. So that was quite an accomplishment. And then there are women who are involved in media now. Things have changed a lot drastically for women, as compared to when they couldn't go out without a male accompanying them when there was Taliban ruling, right?
So, I mean, in terms of what we know about the Taliban ruling, that's actually that's how it was. Mm-hmm. The women couldn't go out. Was women education also banned at the time?
It was, yeah. Women couldn't go to school, they couldn't go to work, they couldn't go outside the home without a male accompanying them, just like I told you. So yeah, there's a lot of drastic change in terms of that. For example, me, myself, my father passed away when I was 5, so, and I don't have a brother. So for my mom to be able to bring up 2 girls, I have another sister, in a society like Afghanistan and be a leader on her own and, thrive is not an easy job. So for me to be able to study and, come here to visit different countries, have exchange programs, study, for me to want to pursue my career is a big difference. It shows a difference in itself. So.
And do you have the safety and security of mobility now in Afghanistan? Moving alone and...
As of right now, in Kabul, yes, but in other provinces that are being controlled by the Taliban, unfortunately, a woman cannot go alone outside.
So it's the same set of rules. The Taliban, in your experience, have not evolved since 1990s.
So there are 2 types of Taliban. As you know, the peace talks have begun in Qatar, Doha. So there's a group of Taliban that are now civil, who are like, okay, you can have a government where women are involved. But then there are Taliban in, for example, my province, who are asking for a list of women who are not married or are single or widowed, who they could marry, or who are setting rules where women cannot go outside alone or study after a certain age. Like after 10th grade, women cannot study anymore. But they want female doctors, right? And then female teachers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense that way.
Yeah.
Right. So there are changes now. Unfortunately, it's getting bad. I hope it doesn't get to where it was like in before 2001. But things are changing. Taliban are like, if we can take over the country by fight, why should we negotiate, right? So they are taking over a lot of provinces as of now.
Right, that's quite unfortunate, sir. If you could tell me a little bit about the seriousness of what Shahrzad just said. Do you think there is a real possibility that the Taliban have enough strength to be able to? I mean, I understand in the 90s, it was a very different time. It was, in my understanding, it was a very tribal setup. So anybody who takes like Kandahar and Kabul and the major cities essentially rules the remainder of Afghanistan. But I feel like in the modern day, it's going to be much more sort of, connected, maybe to the internet. There'll be a huge youth population. Maybe they have different ideas. Do you think at this point in time, it is as easy as it was in the 90s for the Taliban to be able to make a government?
I don't think so. Afghan society has changed, and a lot of things are changing quite fastly. Today's Afghanistan is not the Afghanistan of the 90s when Taliban took and just established their own regime. Today's Afghanistan has changed in terms of culture, in terms of finance, in terms of the income resources, and they all are the major things that have changed the perspective particularly of the people who are living in the urban areas. It is a challenge, I think, for the Taliban to reestablish their
control,
regime.
Essentially.
The regime.
Yeah.
But they are trying. They have some support in the villages and the provinces. But it seems that it is really difficult for them to reestablish and the way they think to control. And what is I think what is quite significant to know about the Taliban is that they are a bunch of mullahs, of village mullahs who don't have the understanding of the governance of today's world, of the modern world, and that is what that distances them from a large proportion of the society, they distancing them from the youth,
right,
from the educated segment of the society, and they don't have any place in their mind.
Right. What's the population of Afghanistan? I mean, in terms of how many million people are there in Afghanistan?
We don't have any official census.
Right.
But it is estimated that Afghanistan has around 32 32 to 34
34 million. That's a sizable population. And I heard, I was reading an article the other day that there are, in terms of the total size, Taliban has like 75,000 fighters. So I mean, I'm seeing this huge discrepancy, right? Like these are 75,000 fighters versus 30 million people. Do they have, support within those 30 million as well? Are these people who are sympathizers with Taliban? And that's one of the reasons why they're able to gather the strength and the ability to be able to, capture a lot of these districts. Or is it more like, people are just so wary of war that they're just like, we don't want to fight anymore. If someone's coming in, just let it be and
I think it's both. Because recently I heard that Takhar province was taken and the people were actually happy about it. Because when the government was ruling, there was like robbery, there were the fear of Taliban and other stuff that contributed to them not being able to live in peace.
Right.
But they took over and now they're like, we keep our shops open. We don't fear robbery anymore. We can just, we go to pray, we come back, we live at peace. Some people do support the Taliban regime because it's about their interest. And as long as they can live in peace, they don't care what the government is going to do.
Right.
But on the other hand, they also have fear on people's hearts. Some people, they just, for example, in Badakhshan province, where I'm from, the police, they just handed over all the arms they had and they left without fighting because of the fear of bloodshed and
Right.
fighting their own brothers and cousins and relatives.
Right.
So it's both, I think.
And do you think there is a possibility that the Taliban could come to the table and sort of create a unity government, or do you think it's always going to be in terms of at least up until the peace talks, a separate terrorist force versus a set of governments which ruling parties and opposition parties? Then the Taliban were always seen as these like separate group of people who were rebellious and who were fighting. But now with the peace talks, can we see them as a political force in the coming years?
First, I think what Ms. Koofi commented, I just want to add something. The reason why Taliban are gaining more support it lies in the failure of the government. The government cannot deliver services. The government is corrupt, and there's a huge gap between public and the government, and Taliban are exploiting that
Right.
gap. It is not the whole nation who are welcoming the Taliban. It is they are fed up with the current government, and that is what the Taliban are exploiting. In terms of peace, I think the Taliban, they think that they are the victorious. They have won militarily, and that they are trying to take control over many cities or Kabul by force. That is their narrative. But that is not the only case. There are many people who resist against Taliban. Historically speaking, they have a lot of problems with Taliban, with their idea, with their ideology, with their way of thinking, and they have been preparing themselves for a fight if the Taliban do not come to the negotiating table. But up till now, they have not shown any sign of reconciliation. The Taliban, I think, they escaped last time off the table, and they did not have any excuse. What they demand is a complete control over Afghanistan and a surrender.
Which obviously nobody's going to sort of accept. That's like a no-brainer.
And the composition of Afghanistan is like Taliban are not the only force who think that they can control and they can govern the country. There are many other forces who are like against Taliban, and they have their own narrative, and they're trying to create their own narrative. And historically speaking, they have been at odds with each other, and that is if the Taliban do not come to negotiating table, that sort of conflict is going to be refought.
So do you think, Shahrzad, a civil war is a real possibility?
Unfortunately, it is. Because, so my mom is part of the negotiation team in Doha. When the first went there, she was shot in her arm by the Taliban probably. and she went there with an injured hand.
In Doha or in Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan. She was shot 1 month before the peace talks, and her hand was in a cast when she went to the talks. They were hopeful. Everybody was very happy. It seemed like a bright future for Afghanistan. But as soon as the US decided to withdraw out of nowhere, I mean, they told us that they are, but they was very unprepared. We were unprepared for this. So after the withdrawal, the Taliban are like, okay, you don't have any international support. We can win through fighting. We're not interested in talking anymore, right? So yeah, that's a bit disappointing, and this may potentially lead to civil war.
I'm gonna change the conversation a little bit, and I'm trying to understand. I mean, you're 23 years old. In Pakistan, one of the major things that we say, is that we have a youth bulge essentially, where 60% of our population is under the age of 30. Is it the same in Afghanistan? Are there a lot of young people?
There are a lot of young people. Do you know the percentage for that?
I don't know the percentage, but majority of the Afghans
are the
under,
youth, yeah.
under,
Are youth.
under.
And so how do you see? I mean, I know that you work again with Pak Afghani Forum as well as with Justice for Equality. How do you see the younger generation? I mean, I do understand obviously the older people. They've lived through severe bloodshed in the 90s. I mean, to be very honest, for the past 40 years, right? I mean, 70s were horrible, 80s were horrible. 90s were horrible, and maybe people thought, okay, maybe even if it's the Taliban, at least we're not fighting anymore. And then 2001 forward, we saw the longest war that US has ever fought. Essentially, while again one direction could lead to an unfortunate civil war, maybe through some miracle we might just for once see Afghanistan with its own fate and with long-lasting sustainable peace. Do you see the younger people be different in terms of how the older generations were?
Absolutely. I feel like I see a lot of disunity among the older generation. Like ethnicity is a very big part of it. Okay, so you're Pashtun, you're Hazara, you're Tajik. That's why we cannot get along together. But I see this very less with the new generation. The younger generation is much more open-minded. They have studied they have been exposed to the new world, to social media, So they have more important stuff in their mind than just to focus on race or gender or ethnicity. So I see a bright future in Afghanistan through our youth if we're given the chance.
Right.
If there's no war, people are very interested to establish their own businesses, join politics, become doctors. Even now, they don't have enough resources, to become their best versions, but they're trying very hard. I've studied in US, and I've seen the difference between youth there and here. They have a lot of opportunities, and they use that, but then I have friends in Afghanistan who don't have internet access, and they manage to get up really early in the morning, go to cafes, do research, just try to become their best version with what they have, which is a very important thing.
And you mentioned internet. Is that still very, very exclusive to certain a certain class of people, or a certain sort of urban, a very exclusive set of people, or is it now becoming more mainstream and going to other cities?
It is becoming mainstream, but it's a bit expensive. Like not everybody can afford it. Right. Even if they did, they have like small packages of like 50 to 200 MBs where they could only use Facebook. That's why Facebook is very popular in Afghanistan. So people even have like, if somebody writes something in Facebook, that it could start a rivalry, like a whole family problem.
Right.
So Facebook is a really important, aspect of the social life in Afghanistan. But yeah, in Kabul and other provinces now too, people are starting to get introduced to social media and internet.
And do you think social media has brought about a change in terms of how people are because they're communicating in an entirely different way altogether, right? They're able to communicate with people that they probably couldn't communicate with before. And I feel like that would, I would hope that would help reduce the differences rather than increase them.
Exactly. It does, yeah. They are connected to different, people from among the globe, and they can exchange views. They even get opportunities to visit their countries or have exchange programs through the internet. So it's definitely a big difference.
Well, that's nice to hear. And I'd like to know a little bit about, I know that you're working on a project with the youth and sort of like creating an outreach program. Can you tell me a little bit about what that's,
Yeah, so we were thinking of, gathering youth from different provinces of Afghanistan, although the security situation is not really good, but we cannot stop living because of that. So to choose a few, group of youth and then talk to them about the peace process, their perspective of peace, their definition of peace, and their narrative and, about the relationship of Afghanistan and Pakistan. After that, then we can gather the representative of those groups to Kabul, and then maybe we can have an exchange program to Pakistan.
Oh, that sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Asad, I'd like to, because you mentioned a relationship with Pakistan, and we know there's definitely a fault line there as well. On social media, we do see a lot of. I don't know if it's actual Afghans or it's profiles. I mean, on social media you can't tell anything anymore. But we do see a certain negative attitude from certain Afghan youth towards Pakistan. And so I'd like to sort of understand, in your experience, what's the narrative in the mass population there in terms of Afghanistan, in terms of Pakistan, and also the other neighbors for Afghanistan, Iran, and I believe Uzbekistan is also connected. Tajikistan is also connected. So what's the general, how do they see their neighbors?
Well, yeah, you're right. The general perception about Pakistan in Afghanistan is not very positive, and that is because of the politics at the very same time. But I think to some extent, media have the responsibility to correct that one. The image that most Pakistani media portray of Afghanistan here is I think is flawed, is not exactly correct. And same is the case with the Afghan media and Afghan public opinion, which is shaped by the media. That is why we have engaged in this program, and I think this is an opportunity to just correct to correct the wrong perceptions that we have about each other, and we should look from a different perspective, and we should talk to each other, and we should bring more people together and talk to
100%. I think engagement is something that truly changes your worldview. And you talked about the media showing Afghanistan. I mean, I don't know how the Afghanistan is showing Pakistan, but obviously you're now in Islamabad, so maybe you're going to go back and be able to provide a better insight. But in terms of how the Pakistani media is portraying Afghanistan, I'd like to understand what has been missing. What is the vacuum? Because I do understand, I totally agree with you, because to be very honest, the media or the media personnel don't really know Afghanistan. It's all just like Chinese whispers, You read something from a guy who also just read something, who also just saw something. Nobody's really sort of connected. So what are the areas where you feel like the media isn't doing justice to the image of Afghanistan?
I think what the media do in both countries is that they see each other from the perspective of the state. Right. And the two states look at each other from a security prism, and that is what that has created a lot of problem and misperception. I remember once I was coming from Islamabad airport to the city. A cab driver, an old man, he asked me where I was from. Then I said Afghanistan. Then he put another question. Then he asked me that if there was any mosque in Kabul. So it was surprising for me. I said yes, there is. Yeah, we are Muslims and there are many mosques. Then I was surprised that who actually
came up with this,
feeds the misinformation. And then that is the case. And there are many things, there are many perceptions that are shaped by certain media in Afghanistan about Pakistan, which is totally wrong, and that is not the true image of Pakistan, I believe, and I think again there are a lot of politicking and a lot of politics, and that is why the two nations are misled.
Right. You talked about the states looking at each other in a security prism. We recently heard on the 18th of March in Pakistan, there was a dialogue where, Islamabad dialogue, where most of the Pakistani sort of state machinery got together, and they laid out essentially a new plan for Pakistan going forward. And they said, we're moving away from geosecurity, and we're now moving towards geoeconomics. And that part, that essentially that new direction includes connecting the entire region, helping the region grow, in terms of, with each other, rather than, fighting amongst each other and then maybe trading with the Europeans or the Americans. The idea is what if we could all have connectivity? What if we could all learn to coexist and, be beneficial to each other because we're right next to each other, right? So in terms of that particular direction, before I go more towards the international side, within Afghanistan, and I know for a fact that conflict generally ends up brewing a lot more when the economic opportunities are less for people. So what is the economy of Afghanistan right now? And what are the major areas, particularly if Shahrzad you could add as well, where this large amount of youth could be integrated within the system, because again, from an eye, from a lens of an outsider, it seems like there's not a lot that has happened there to provide opportunities and productivity to younger people, and obviously then they have a very, very high tendency to move towards these sort of rebellious, anti-state activities.
Absolutely. I think one of the main reasons the youth now are getting engaged with the Taliban is because they just say it out loud that we don't have any jobs. We are just graduated from universities even, or school, and we don't have anything else to do. So in order for my family to be able to survive, I'll go join the Taliban. So either give me jobs or I'll do that. In terms of what the possibilities are for economics in Afghanistan, Afghanistan is a very agricultural country. So if we focus on that, also it's a very rich country in terms of mines, oil. We're a very rich country in terms of like its geography, right. But we just can't use it properly because of war. Due to the war that the provinces are going through, the security issues, we're not able to utilize our the things that we have.
So when you talk about agriculture. Because in my mind, when I see Afghanistan, and every picture that I've ever seen of Afghanistan, I've just seen like these barren lands of mountains, and I for the life of me, I couldn't think that Afghanistan could produce its own food based on the imagery that I've seen. So are there areas within Afghanistan that are green and fertile and
Right. No, Afghanistan is very diverse in terms of its geography. So in northern part we have mountains, even in the middle part, but then in the border with Pakistan, it's very warm. So the similar weather, kind of like from Pakistan. So we have a lot of greenery, we have crops, we have rice. If we were able to work on our agriculture, we'll be self-sufficient. We wouldn't need to import, goods from outside. But it's because of war that we cannot do that.
And in terms of, beyond agriculture, you talked about minerals and mines and stuff like that. Asad, can you run me a little bit through whether that has been exploited at all? I mean, exploited is a negative word, but has there been work and interest within the Afghan private sector that have tried to sort of utilize those resources?
No, Afghanistan is a landlocked country, and its economy is dependent. And misfortunately, its economy is a war economy. You mentioned that yes, there are discussion of the regional connectivity, and that is the only hope. Afghanistan and Pakistan were neighbors and are neighbors and will remain neighbors, and then they have to come and settle their problems. And there are a lot of people in Afghanistan that they do not think the way the successive governments in Kabul think about many issues, particularly about the Duran issue, about the bilateral relation with Pakistan. But such voices are a little bit unheard, particularly here in Pakistan. I think a fault Pakistan has committed and has been committing is that Pakistan has been engaged with a specific group in Afghanistan, and they think that specific group can be a good partner for Pakistan in Afghanistan. If they engage with other spectrum of the society, with civil society, with think tanks, with universities, with media people, I think we can do a lot, and we can promote that aim of regional connectivity and can solve many problems through discussion, and can change the negative image that we have about each other, which is to many extent wrong. Yep. And not correct.
And I think there's definitely a definitive push from within the Pakistani state and establishment that I've personally experienced, within the last 6 months or 1 year. and they're now the entire direction of how they're approaching the Afghanistan situation, in my experience, has changed. They are looking at the regional connectivity. They are looking at the economic side of things as well. And I think because of that, like just as you mentioned, I think they are going to understand the opportunity on both sides. To maybe do things differently this time around. But I'd also like to understand in terms of your other neighbors. You mentioned Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Iran. What are the relationships like of the Afghan government with these neighbors?
Again, it varies. Afghanistan has a friendly relationship with its neighbors in the north, with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and in the west with Turkmenistan. Its relationship with Iran has not been very friendly, but it is to an extent good. Afghanistan has, Afghan government has problem with governments in Pakistan, and that is that bothers, I think, the two nations. But when it comes to trade, to business, there are not a lot of activities between Afghanistan and its northern neighbors, but somehow they have friendly
relations with them.
Relationship.
And I know that there is definitely an economic, there is definitely trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We know that both sides of the border, people are very connected to each other. The US left, and you mentioned that they left it quite in a hurry. And this question can be answered by either one of you. Do you have any hope for other regional powers, including Russia or China, that they could potentially step in and be able to maneuver through the situation and save Afghanistan from a potential civil war or a potential chaotic situation? Or do you think Afghanistan, unfortunately, has been left on its own this time around?
I wouldn't say unfortunately. I would say it is a good opportunity for us to be able to stand on our own feet finally. I don't want any more intervention from US or any other international community in Afghanistan, because we are capable of changing our own country if we wanted to. But I think there are internal conflicts like ethnicity issues and other unity issues that we have, that if we resolved, we would be one of the most successful countries in the world because we have the potential of it. So no, personally, my friend might have a different opinion here, but I personally don't want any more interventions for my country.
And Asad, what do you think? Do you think there is?
I think Afghanistan's neighbor and the regional countries, they can play a very vital role in Afghanistan's peace, as they have a very, 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 a very vital role meaningful role in Afghanistan's war. The war that is going on in Afghanistan is, to some extent, the war is the result of the conflict, the internal conflict. But at the very same time, it is the war of the other powers.
Right.
The geopolitics of Afghanistan is quite complex, and it has been.
Right.
I think Pakistan can play a very vital role. Iran can also play a very, very significantly vital role, and same can China do a very vital role, play a vital role, and Russia, and then the rest. Yes, and I think we cannot come to resolve our problems unless the regional countries they come together and set their problems.
Right.
A lot of things that are going on in Afghanistan is due to the rivalry that is existing between India and Pakistan or Kashmir and rest of the problems that they have, and unless they do not come to terms, then the conflict in Afghanistan will continue.
Right. And in terms of, we talked about economics a little earlier. We are, hearing about this railroad project through Afghanistan all the way to Uzbekistan to connect the Central Asian states to Pakistan and eventually down to the sea, as well as Afghanistan. How important do you think that is for Afghanistan in terms of, is that just a transit route for Afghanistan at this point in time? Or do you think it could potentially facilitate, like you said, Afghanistan is a landlocked country right now, and because of that, the rich mineral resources haven't been tapped. Do you think, and that's where my question with regional players came in, because I do understand, you don't want the regional players to be meddling with your politics. You don't want them to be meddling in terms of, bringing in soldiers or honestly just like playing along with the fight. It is a fight between Afghans, and they will know how to resolve it, and only they can resolve it in a way that it is long lasting as well. But in terms of economics, I do believe that if, for example, for Afghanistan right now, with the lack of money and a lack of investment, it would be difficult to kickstart the industries and to kickstart the economy. But for a country like China, for example, which has a definitive supply chain, if there is a connectivity through Pakistan, they could potentially invest in China, in Afghanistan, and be able to provide opportunities for the youth, and they could eventually start to trickle away from all of the chaos and move towards more productivity. How do you find that?
I think we can benefit a lot from that project, the CPEC and the rest that is going on here, and the Gwadar project, and that is the only way that can resolve the problem. But what I think so far is missing on the part of Pakistan is that there is less investment on the part of Pakistan when it comes to Afghanistan. Yes, Pakistan is never, and yes, we have to have a good relationship, but how? Then that depends on how you do and how you work with each other. Afghanistan is a poor country at the very same time,
right,
and it needs help.
Right.
And there is a vacuum. If that vacuum is not filled by the neighbor that thinks that can benefit a lot, then that shall be filled with by the other neighbor. Remember, I think India in Afghanistan has been using aid development projects as weapon.
Right, as a diplomatic tool, yeah.
Yes, to influence the public opinion over there, and the perception about India is quite positive.
Yeah.
And India has a good image in Afghanistan.
Right.
While India's presence in the long run and in the short term is not in the benefit in the interest of Afghanistan. So is the presence of Iran in any other country.
Right.
So it is a country where almost all countries, almost all neighbors, they look after their strategic
interests, obviously, understandably,
yes.
yeah.
Then it depends on how you play and how you look after your interest and how you can gain that.
That makes
and
sense.
there are a lot of opportunities. I think when it comes to trade, when it comes to bilateral relationship, when it comes to regional connectivity between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that is the time, and this is the time to just put that into practice,
right,
and change the direction and change the narrative, and we can benefit a lot from that.
From that relationship. I'm gonna, we're at almost the 40-minute mark. I'd like to sort of change the conversation a little bit and try to understand the future of Afghanistan. If you could give me, and I'd like to ask both of you, but I'd like to start with Shahrzad. You're just 23. 23 is a very sort of hopeful age. It's the peak of your youth. And so if I were to ask you, give me two directions of the future of Afghanistan. One, in the best case scenario, and two, in if it turns out for the worst.
Interesting question. So, best case scenario, the peace talks are successful. The Taliban comes to an agreement. There's an interim government, and then after that, they can come to an agreement, and then they can create a government where everybody's included and everybody can prosper. Everybody could invest in themselves, invest in the country. Foreigners will invest because of the prosperity. Worst case scenario, Afghanistan will go back to where it was. A lot of people say it will not, but there are high chances that it will. Although people are changed, people have developed, they are more accomplished now. But then we also have brain drain in Afghanistan. I know a lot of people personally who are very good with what they do. They have very good ideas, but they cannot implement it. So they have to save themselves and their families. So if they get the opportunity, they leave. We have a lot of very talented and full of potential people that are on the urge of leaving country or have already left the country.
And what are the options for people who generally end up leaving? Are they going to the US or Europe?
Many different countries. Even Tajikistan have just recently announced if the international community is going to help them, they're ready to accept the refugees from Afghanistan.
Right.
They're coming to Pakistan. They're going to Canada. They are going to European countries. Literally anywhere they could find. Australia. If they have family members, if they know friends, if they have any ray of hope of getting out of Afghanistan, they will. People are selling their properties. I know neighbors who are selling their whole properties, everything they have. And although they love their country, it's hard to take such decisions. But for the better future of their kids, they have to make such decisions. So that's the worst case scenario.
Right. And Asad, what do you think?
I think we have time and we can do a lot of things. We can put pressure on Taliban and bring them to the negotiating table. And if that works, yes, of course we will have a settlement and we all benefit, and yes, we have more prosperity and less migration. But if that does not work, of course we will have refugee influx back to Pakistan, and we have a war. And remember, when you have a neighbor and where there is fight going on, then it fires back to your home as well.
Right, 100%.
And that is a threat. Things are political, but I expect that we can still work for peace, promote peace, and put pressure on public opinion, and generate a narrative that can sort of change the narrative of Taliban, that they think they are the victorious and they think that they can do and they can manage their affairs. That is why I'm here, and that is why I'm interested in this conference, and I'm trying my best to just convince people from the media and diplomats and the rest that yes, we have to come together and work and think for a better future.
100%. Guys, I wish you all the very best. I don't know how, it's a tough time. I can't even imagine what you and your families are going through in Afghanistan, and I hope, I pray, and I know, everyone I know in Pakistan is praying for you. I know that there is definitely a different direction, like you mentioned. I think there is a very unique opportunity to reset the relationships. I think that opportunity, particularly in terms of our establishment and our government and state, they're looking at Afghanistan in a very different way this time around. And I hope that we're able to create a situation where, through economics, we can provide a growth, and we can provide a sustainable living for both our peoples. Thank you so much for the insight that you've shared. Thank you so much for being part of the show. And I wish you all the very best.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And for all of you guys, thank you so much for watching. अगर आपको ये episode पसंद आई हो, पहला तो मुझे comment section में बताइएगा what do you guys think. For me, it was a fairly humbling experience to have met these two quite amazing people. But I'd like to hear your opinions as well. इसी के साथ साथ there is a left right के ऊपर there is an easy पैसा jazz cash opportunity if you'd like to support the podcast. Audio platforms वाले subscribe का बटन दबाएंगे, आने वाली episode का notification मिलेगी. YouTube वाले like का बटन दबाएंगे, engagement बढ़ेगी, ज़्यादा लोगों तक हमारी conversation पहुंचेगी. Facebook वाले TBT community join करेंगे तो नीचे दी गई हुई link के ऊपर click करके तो TBT community join कर सकते हैं. यहाँ पर हम different articles share करते हैं, आपका feedback वगैरह लेते हैं, so you can join that. But anyways, this was Muzamil Hasan. You were watching Thought Behind Things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.